Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life, won't live in the past. All I wanna do now is making it last.
How can one focus on being spiritual and not just religious? This is Making It Last podcast. I'm your host, Noreen Daly, and with me this time around, I have Pickqueena Burrell, who is a clerical assistant at Northern Caribbean University. And in another life, she's also the third place winner for Miss Manchester Festival Queen for 2019-2020.
Yeah.
And we have also Lincoln Liking, a religion major at Northern Caribbean University. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let me give a background to this topic now. When you're on vacation, you get a lot of time to think. Sometimes you end up thinking about things you probably shouldn't be thinking about. But one of the things outside of reevaluating some of my relationships, I started thinking about my relationship with God. And I got to thinking over the summer that a lot of the things that I grew up believing aren't necessarily biblical. They're really just preferences that have been fed over a period. What that had me thinking about is the fact that I really need to ensure that I'm sure that I believe what I believe because it's biblical and not just. Hence the spin-off, Pickqueena and Lincoln, in terms of the whole idea of being spiritual and not just religious, because I do believe there's a slight distinction. So for Pickqueena, what is that for you? And for Lincoln, what is that for you? Before we get into the discussion.
Well, for me, basically, being religious and being spiritual are, I think, major differences. Being religious is more earthly bound, and being spiritual is more heavenly bound. So me being religious takes a lot of things away from me. I see things differently and based on how I would seeing it, how I would be seeing it if I was more spiritual, if I was on the spiritual side more than just being on the religious side.
Okay. Lincoln?
Well, yeah, I do think there is definitely a difference between religious and spiritual. I don't think being religious is necessarily a bad thing.
Okay.
Religion or being religious doesn't necessarily make you a spiritual person. You can be a part of a faith group, like a Seventh-day Adventist, a Christian or a Muslim, and that the religion that you're associated with, but you don't have a spiritual life. You don't have that living, breathing connection with God. And, interestingly enough, in the Bible, the word religion isn't used a lot. It's not used a lot. And in fact, there's an adjective, it's found in James chapter 1, verse 27. The Bible talks about pure religion. So there's something that has to go before religion to qualify, because religion of itself is not necessarily the thing that will garner spiritual growth, even though I do think there is a place for an organized body of beliefs. All of that is well and good. But I believe that God wants us to worship him in spirit and truth. And the fact that he put spirit first tells us that we have to transcend our religious dogmas to be able to have that experience with him. Again, not that beliefs are bad, but ultimately beliefs in and of themselves do not make you a spiritual person.
Okay. Pickqueena, you want to comment on that?
I somewhat agree. And what I think is, as you said, being religious is not really a bad thing. But what I believe is that being religious has levels to it.
Okay.
So you are a part of a Muslim group or you're a Christian, you're a part of a religious group. So I mean, you're a religious person. But to another extent, um, looking on it on a different perspective, you can almost say that it's kind of not of a good thing. It's not really 50-50, but I would say 80% bad, 20% good, based on what I
On your
believe.
perspective.
Yes.
Okay. So how then, because I noticed Lincoln that just now you said that you can be religious but not spiritual. How then do we strive to have this spiritual life or this spiritual
And
connection then?
well, that is it. From a Christian perspective, one has to have a relationship with Jesus. I
Okay.
mean, you have persons who have grown up in the church, you have persons who have been exposed to religion. They're nominal Christians or nominal Muslims, if there's such a thing. But unless you have that living, breathing connection with Jesus and is filled with the Spirit of God, then your religion is in vain.
Okay.
And that's where I'm coming from. That again, I don't see having an organized body, an organized set of beliefs as necessarily a bad thing. It can become one. It can become one, but it has to go beyond that. And to do that, you really need to have that living, breathing relationship with another person. So often we think of God as someone to be studied or debated or discussed, but God is a person. And because God is a person, you have to have a relationship with that person to experience that spiritual life. So for me, as a Christian, that's my aim and goal, to have the closest relationship with Jesus as I possibly can.
Pickqueena, how then do you think we can get this spiritual life?
As was rightfully said, having a relationship with God. But how do one go about having a relationship with God? It is more than just saying it. It is doing it. Actually living, not living in the moment, but living in the moment and continuously. Just like how we have relationship with our friends, with our, our teachers, our school members. I believe it's the same way that we should have a relationship with God. We should tell God everything. He's an all-knowing God. He knows everything and he sees everything. But at the same time, he also asks us to, still ask of him. So in having a relationship with God, it then leads us to not being just a spiritual, because everything has its ups and everything
That's
has
right.
its downs. So you have good and bad of being a spiritual person. You can be too spiritual and you can be just the right spiritual person. So I believe talking to God, asking him what is it that he wants of me, speaking to him not just like a supreme being and a human, but speaking to him on a level that we are comfortable.
Okay.
So I'm comfortable with my friends, so I should be even more comfortable with talking and relating with God.
Lincoln, anything you want to add?
Yes, I'd like to piggyback on the idea that you can be too spiritual. I agree with that. Just as how you can be too religious,
Yes.
you can't be too spiritual. And that's why I love when Jesus says in John 4, verse 24, and he says, God is spirit, but those who worship him must worship him in spirit and the truth. You see, truth is important for the spiritual life, and the spirit is important for truth. So often we can be so in quote unquote truth and dogma and systems that we ignore the spiritual life. Or we can be too into the spirit and ignore truth. They both matter, they balance each other out. So, and that's why I like how you approach it, when you say not just religious, because being just religious can lead to tyranny. History shows us that
Yes,
if
yes.
you're just religious, while at the same time, if you're too spiritual, it leads to a disconnect from the reality and the world. And you have people who have isolated themselves and are of no earthly good. They're so heavenly minded that they're of no earthly good because they're too spiritual.
Yeah.
So, I like the idea of spirit and truth as Jesus outlined.
Okay. So Pickqueena and Lincoln, how do you focus on being spiritual and not just, this is your personal
Yeah.
perspective now, yeah. How do you focus on being spiritual and not just religious?
Well, for me, I understand what it is to be spiritual and being religious. Because to do something, I have to be conscious about what it is.
Okay.
So how I go about doing this, I make sure that every day I talk with God.
Okay.
I make sure that He's not left alone and I'm not left alone. I make sure that everything that I am doing, He has a say within my life. And this is communication never fails. So you being a great communicator with God will take you to boundaries, more than boundaries, but take you to places. So how I go about making sure that I'm not just being religious, but being spiritual is talking with God, making sure that everything I do, He agrees.
Okay. Lincoln?
Yeah, for me, it's similar in that, Jesus said that, for this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. And for me, the only fight in this life that's truly worth it is the fight to know God. And it is the greatest fight in my experience, the fight to spend time with Him every day. The fight to spend time in the Word, the fight to spend time in prayer, the fight to be a witness for Him. That is the fight. That's a spiritual fight. Because, the Word of God is bread. Prayer is the breath of the soul. And one is a light in dark places. So for me, that is what I strive to do. And I find that when I do that, I don't have to worry about being overly spiritual or over religious. That experience grounds me in truth, but at the same time extends me in the spiritual realm to really have a relationship with an invisible God. So that's what I encourage persons to do. That if you really want to have that balance in your life where spirit is important and truth is important, fight the fight that's worth it, that daily fight of spending time with God and getting to know Him.
Okay. Any final thoughts from either one of you as we're wrapping up?
Just to say that, God understands and He knows everything. So, if we are facing a problem, we should also remember that God is not just a supreme being. He is our Father, He is our friend, and best believe He understands.
Lincoln?
Yeah, just encourage persons to go beyond their religious norms and, to go beyond going to church on a Saturday or a Sunday, or going beyond saying you're a Christian but living like the world. Have that spiritual life. Strive to be, as the Bible puts it, a life-giving spirit. And if we strive to be life-giving spirits, then definitely I think we'll have that balance and we'll have the spiritual life that is extremely important for us.
Making It Last podcast is all about helping us to have better relationships, not just with ourselves, but with other people. Thank you, Pickqueena, and thank you, Lincoln.
Sure enough.
This is Noreen Daly. Until next time.
Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life won't live in the past. All I wanna do now is make King Elijah